diagram 5. It's measurements as multiples of 5s. And we're gonna talk about the general construction. We'll talk about measurements. We'll talk about numbers of different materials and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to show you something. We're going to talk a lot about symbolism, and at some point I will give you a handout that tells you basically what numbers typically mean. Numbers have value in Hebrew circles, and so the number of a man is 666, for example, and so numbers have significance. And one of the things that we'll find out is that the number 5 is the number of grace. Okay, the number 1 is the number of beginnings, and the number of 8 is the number of new beginnings. The number of 7 is the number of completion, but number 5 is the number of grace. And so I wanted to just look at some of the breakdown of the different things in the general construction. For example, the court. The court has 60 pillars. That's 12 times 5. Speaks of grace. 12 is the number of tribes. 60 capitals. Capital is the thing that goes on top of the pillar, just kind of ornate. And there were 60 of those. That's 12 times 5. 60 sockets underneath the pillar. And there were different ones. There were silver sockets for some of the pillars. There were brass. We'll talk about the significance and the differences and the comparisons of those later on. But there were 60 of those. There were 120 pins. That is 24 times 5. The thing was 100 cubits long. That's 20 times 5. It was 50 cubits wide. That's 10 times 5. It was 5 cubits high. 1 times 5. 5 is the number of grace. So we see God's grace over and over. On the below, that's the tabernacle. It was 30 cubits long. And when I say tabernacle, I'm talking about the actual tent and structure that was inside the courtyard. It was 30 cubits long. That's 6 times 5. 10 cubits wide. That's 2 times 5. 10 cubits high. That's 2 times 5. Is 100 silver sockets used in that. That was 20 times 5. There were 15 bars. 3 times 5. 5 bars on each side. 1 times 5. There were 10 curtains. 2 times 5. There were 50 clasps. 10 times 5. 100 blue loops. 20 times 5. The entrances. The gate was 20 cubits wide, which is 4 5s. The gate was 5 cubits high, which is 1 times 5. Doors 10 cubits wide. 2 times 5. 10 cubits high. 2 times 5. And the door was on 5 pillars. 1 times 5. The veil was 10 cubits wide. 2 times 5. The veil was 10 cubits high. 2 times 5. And then the Holy of Holies was 10 by 10 by 10. Each of those is 2 times 5. The bronze altar, 5 by 5 cubits square. There were 5 vessels. There were 5 animals. There were 5 offerings. And in the ark, there were 10 commandments, which is 2 times 5. The holy place was 20 cubits long, 4 times 5. 10 cubits wide, 2 times 5, and 10 cubits high, 10 times 5. So can we say that we see the green? He quoted Noah in his response to God. God told him, says, "Hey, I want you to build me an ark. I want to build it so many cubits long and so many." And he goes, "Right. What's a cubit?" And when God told him to build it 300 cubits long, first of all, he says, "Hey, I want you to build me an ark." And Noah goes, "Right. What's an ark?" Because it never rained, So he's building this ark. He says, "I want you to make it 300 cubits long, and 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits right." Right. What's a cubit? Well, there are several definitions of what a cubit is. Ancient measures of length was based on the human body. For example, the length of the foot, the length of a stride, the span of a hand, the breadth of a thumb, and there was an unbelievable number of different measurement systems that were developed in early times. Most of them only being used in a small locality. One which gained a certain universal nature was that of the Egyptian cubit, believed to have been developed around 3000 BC. And based on the human body, it was taken to be the length of the arm from the elbow, tip of the elbow, to the tip of the long finger. And so That's where we get, I know Sherry's a nurse, I'm a nurse, any of the nurses in here? What do you call that? The antecubital fossa, right? So that's a cubit. It's from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Now you can see how working on a particular construction site might be a problem if you got two guys doing the measure and they're different, you know, they have different length arms. So, okay, this guy's getting his wall done and his arm's 1.5 inches shorter, and so it's going to be, you know, it would look like something that I would build. So, so it could be a problem. So the Egyptians developed what they called a standard royal cubit, which was preserved in the form of a black granite rod. And so they just created this rod that was kind of like a yardstick today, or a 12-inch ruler, something like that. So this was a standard royal cubit. And then everyone could use that the way that we use a tape measure or a yardstick. To measure smaller length required divisions of this royal cubit. Now you would think that dividing the royal cubit would be something logical, maybe, you know, hash marks on the black rod that they were given, that they would standardize, like maybe a 1/32 of an inch, or well, we would think of a 1/32 or 1/64 of an inch. But it wasn't that simple. Rather than having standardized subdivided units of measure for the royal cubit, people generally measured shorter lengths using other parts of the human body. The digit was the smallest basic unit, which was the breadth of a finger, how wide a finger is. There were 28 digits in a cubit, that is and 24 digits in a small cubit, and several other similar measurements. It was just no real rhyme or reason to us. I'm sure it made sense to them. Now, whenever they wanted measures that were smaller than a digit, the Egyptians used measures that were composed of unit fractions. There have been found in Egyptian papyri, for example, they've found these papyri that contain methods for solving equations which arise from problems with weights and measures in their day. A later civilization whose weights and measures had a wide influence was that of the Babylonians, and this came into being about 1700 BC. Their basic unit of length, like the Egyptians, was the cubit. The Babylonian cubit, though, at 530 millimeters, was slightly longer than the Egyptian cubit at 524 millimeters. The Babylonian cubit was divided into 30 what they called kus. It's K-U-S, which is interesting since the kus must have been about a finger's breadth, but the fraction 1/30th is one that is also closely connected to the Babylonian base 60 number system.